We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. That's the text I got from my own mother. My parents locked me out of the house my grandmother legally left to me, trashed my stuff, and tried to sell it behind my back. Then they accused me of stealing my own inheritance. But what they didn't know, I had proof, her voice on tape. And that changed everything. Here's how I took it all back. My phone buzzed while I was looking over marketing plans. My name is Emily, and I'm 29 years old. We replaced all the locks according to my mother's text. You no longer have a house. I texted back, my fingers shaking. How funny. How courageous they believe they are. Hee. But I was broken on the inside. My own parents were stealing my grandmother's house, which was rightfully mine according to her will. I was unaware that my family would be destroyed by this inheritance. If you've ever suffered with toxic family dynamics, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from before I reveal how this family horror began. Because believe me, even my lawyer was taken aback by what transpired next. I always assumed my family was typical while I was growing up in Boston. Normal, but not flawless. Linda and Charles, my parents, were industrious middle-class individuals. Dad was a bank branch manager. At the nearby elementary school, Mom was a third-grade teacher. Our little suburban home was comfortable, and we took yearly trips to Cape Cod and had family dinners most nights. I got along with my younger brother Ryan, but we did have the usual sibling arguments. However, my grandmother Grace was always the center of our family. In Cambridge, she resided in a stunning Victorian home that had been in our family for 3 generations. We celebrated every holiday there. I learned how to make cookies there, and I found solace there during my tumultuous adolescence. My grandma was my confidant, my support system, and frequently my guardian, particularly when Mom's need for perfection got to be too much. Grandma used to tell me, "You've always understood this house, Emily," as we sat on her wraparound porch. "You see beyond the walls to the stories it holds." I had no idea at the time how important those words would be. Our family was crushed last year when Grandma died at the age of 92. Everything changed when her will was read a month later. She had left her house to me, along with a note saying that she thought I would preserve its history and character, much to the astonishment of everyone, especially my parents. In her spidery handwriting, she had scrawled, "The house isn't just property. Our family's history is what Emily will respect." My folks were clearly taken aback. At the very least, they had believed that the house would go to their 2 children, or that it would be sold and the earnings divided between them. As the lawyer read the will, my mother's face turned pale and then red with rage. Her voice was strained as she said, "There must be some mistake." Toward the end, Mother wasn't thinking clearly. However, there was no error. The will was notarized, witnessed, and executed correctly. My grandma had been mentally healthy. I was the legal owner of the house. At first, I made an effort to be accommodating. "Nothing has to change," I said to my parents the following day over coffee. "I want to preserve the house, not keep you from it. We can still have family gatherings there. I just want to honor Grandma's wishes." Sophie, my closest friend, cautioned me. "Your mom has always been controlling, Ash. And this is a lot of money we're talking about. That house must be worth over $1 million in today's market." I insisted, "They're my parents. They'll come around once they process their grief." Things were stressful but bearable for a few months. After I moved in, I started making thoughtful improvements to the house, keeping its original features while modernizing the electrical and plumbing. Even though my mother frequently criticized my modifications, I frequently welcomed my family over. As she ran her fingertips over the freshly painted dining room, she would remark, "Your grandmother kept that wallpaper for 40 years. Those curtains are completely out of style with the house's period." Ryan attempted to mediate the conflict. After a particularly stressful Sunday supper, he told me, "Mom's just having a hard time with change. Dad as well. They intended to sell this property as part of their retirement plans." Despite my understanding of their disappointment, I remained steadfast. Grandma wished for me to remain in the family and keep the house. I was doing what she wanted. When I revealed that I intended to turn a portion of the property into a tiny art gallery with local artists, the real turmoil started. The gallery would help generate revenue to preserve the aged home, and the large front parlor was ideal for displays. 2 weeks ago, during a family meal, I presented the notion. My dad protested right away. It's a residential area there. You can't just start a company there. I can, in fact, I clarified. The city has previously been consulted. It is permitted under the historical building exemption with appropriate permits and restricted hours. My mom shoved her dish out of her way. With all the traffic and strangers walking through, you're going to damage this area. Do you want it that way? That isn't how it will be, Mom. It's a little, carefully chosen gallery that only accepts appointments and may only have 3 or 4 people at a time. The dispute intensified until my dad held up his hand. Enough. Emily owns the residence. She is free to make stupid choices if she so chooses. I saw that as reluctant acceptance. Soon after, my parents departed, and I thought that we had arrived at a turning point. Ryan followed. As he assisted me with the dishes, he murmured, "They'll come around. Give them some time." I trusted him. What they were really plotting, I didn't know. For a 3-day marketing seminar, I had to take a plane to Chicago. I got a big new customer for our agency, and the presentation I had been working on for months went really well. I was feeling really happy as my plane touched down in Boston. I texted Sophie from the airport saying, "I can't wait to sleep in my own bed tonight." I dragged my suitcase up the front steps of the house after taking an Uber there. I figured that my key was simply sticking in the lock when it didn't work because the door was more than a century old and occasionally required some prodding. I made a few attempts before realizing there was a problem. I became aware of the new deadbolt at that point. My heart began to race. I took out my phone and gave my mom a call. No response. I gave my dad a try. Directly to voicemail. My phone was buzzing just as I was ready to contact Ryan. My mother sent me a text. Every lock was replaced by us. You no longer own a house. The family, not just you, owns this house. Incredulous, I gazed at the screen. As I responded reply, my fingers were shaking. How amusing. How courageous they believe they are. Hee. I wanted to come out as assured and unconcerned. I was crumbling inside. I felt like I was out of breath as I stood on the porch of my own home, which my grandma had legally bequeathed to me. I gave Ryan a call. "Were you aware of this?" When he responded, I demanded, "How about?" He sounded truly perplexed. "Mom and Dad changed Grandma's house's locks. I'm locked out of my own house by them." A long pause ensued. "Oh, Ash. I apologize. I was unaware that they would do that. Where are they?" "I have to speak with them immediately. They spent the weekend at the Cape. They won't return until Sunday evening." My thoughts were racing. It was Friday night. Where would I spend the next 2 days? "Could you just come let me in, Ryan? A key must be with you." One more pause. "No, Ash. Look, I can't get involved in this even if I did. They're furious about your intentions for the gallery. What I'm listening to is unbelievable. Ryan, this is my home. Lawfully. They can't simply shut me out. Perhaps you should let them cool off for a while. Spend the weekend with a friend." I felt completely deceived, not only by my parents, but also by my brother, so I hung up and collapsed upon the porch steps. I became aware of the trash bags at that point. Beside the bushes were 3 big black garbage bags. When I opened one, my clothing were hurriedly stuffed inside. My bathroom supplies and toiletries were in the second. The third included books, framed pictures, and sentimental items. My life had been packed up and thrown out with the garbage. I tried to speak steadily when I called Sophie. She said, "I'm coming to get you right now. This evening, you will remain with me." I was worried that my parents would have alerted the neighbors that I was trespassing, so I sat watch over my baggage while I waited for Sophie. I tensed up with every passing car. Sophie helped me carry everything into her car when she got there. "This is crazy," she said repeatedly. This is illegal for them to do. I understand, I answered numbly. But they still did it. When I arrived at Sophie's apartment, I found that a number of significant items were gone, including my passport and birth certificate, a leather-bound journal my grandmother had kept about the history of the property, and her jewelry box, which included heirloom pieces and the original copy of her will. These were things I hadn't noticed. They hadn't been packaged on purpose. Lying on Sophie's awful pull-out couch that night, I sobbed until my eyes dried up. I could feel the betrayal between my ribs like a knife. My parents were like this. The ones who were meant to adore me without conditions. Rather, I had been evicted like an unwelcome renter. To get back into my house, I considered smashing a window, but I knew that would just make things worse and possibly give them legal grounds against me. I had to be more intelligent than that. When Ryan called the following morning, he said, "I spoke with Mom and Dad. They won't budge. They believe that you have been self-centered about the house." Self-centered? Ryan, it's my house. I was left to do it by Grandma. They believe that by making it a business, you are demeaning the family. Dad says that none of this would be taking place if you simply decided to sell it and divide the proceeds. What I was hearing was unbelievable. So, money is at issue here? Are they prepared to abandon their daughter in order to obtain money? Ash, it's not only about the money. Respect is at issue. They believe you don't give a damn about their desires. What about Grandma's desires? How about honoring her desires? Ryan let out a sigh. Look, I'm attempting to assist. They might let you back in if you apologize and agree to talk about selling the house. Sorry? For what purpose? For lawfully possessing property that I inherited? For wishing to comply with our grandmother's instructions? Ash, you're not making this any easier. I'm not attempting to make things simpler. I'm attempting to comprehend how my relatives may have harmed me. Sophie wrapped her arm around me when I hung up. Ash, you need legal counsel. As in, yesterday. She was correct. A family chat was not going to solve this. I needed legal protection since my parents had gone too far. One of the most difficult times in my life was that first weekend of being uprooted. I was afraid for my future, confused of what to do next, and felt totally abandoned by my family. But something else was starting to show through the confusion and hurt. Drive. What was lawfully mine was not theirs to take. I have no right to be discarded in this manner. They couldn't get away with that, in my opinion. I started looking up lawyers who focused on property law on Monday morning after calling in sick to work. By midday, I was scheduled to see Natalie Chin, a well-regarded attorney whose internet reviews commended her ability to combine compassion and professionalism. I felt a little more at ease in Natalie's office, which was in a renovated brownstone in downtown. It was a calm space with cozy furnishings and soft lighting. Natalie paid close attention as I went over everything, making brief notes and posing insightful, illuminating queries. She leaned forward with a serious gaze when I was done. She stated, "I want to be clear first. What your parents did was against the law. It is illegal and is known as self-help eviction, even though they aren't the legitimate proprietors. I take it you have both the will and the deed." I felt sick to my stomach. I spoke slowly and explained that my grandmother's jewelry box, which my parents had neglected to pack, contained the original will. However, the lawyer provided me a copy following the reading, so I have one. Natalie gave a nod. That's a beginning. We'll ask the probate court for the formal copy. But what about the action? The same circumstance. However, the county had a record of the transfer. All right. Those records are freely accessible to us. On her computer, she entered something. We must take quick action to recover your custody of the property by requesting an emergency injunction. Next, seek compensation for the missing personal belongings and the unlawful eviction. Everything became suddenly extremely real when the word damages was spoken. I would have to take my parents to court. I muttered, "I just want my house back." Natalie's face became softer. "I know this is challenging. Your parents are these. However, they have decided to deal with this unlawfully instead than through the appropriate means. We must safeguard your interests. She started creating the required documentation once I gave my approval. She promised to file the forms that afternoon once I signed them. She said that in the interim, you should keep a record of everything, including any correspondence from your brother or parents, any costs you pay, and any missing items from your possessions. And, if at all possible, avoid getting in touch with them personally. From now on, everything should pass through me. My phone beeped with a notice as I was leaving her office. I was tagged in a Facebook post by my mother. I'm devastated that, in defiance of our wishes, my own daughter would violate family customs and convert her grandmother's cherished house into a business. Some people lose sight of their origins. Numerous friends and family members had already left heartfelt comments on the page, the majority of which expressed surprise at my selfishness and offered their support to my parents. I was the antagonist in the story she was writing, and others were blindly accepting it. That night, I showed Sophie the post. "This is a campaign of smears," she declared fiercely. "They're using social humiliation to try to put pressure on you." My father left me the first of many voicemails that evening. I had never heard his voice before. It was icy and menacing. "Emily, you've made a grave error by enlisting the help of a lawyer. Your mom is inconsolable. You are extremely mistaken if you believe that the family will tolerate you destroying your grandmother's legacy. You will be sorry if you don't drop this now." Every message after that became increasingly antagonistic. By the third message, he was threatening to challenge the will, saying I had influenced my grandmother too much. It was utterly false, yet it would be costly and emotionally draining to defend against such charges. In the meantime, family members started picking sides. My mother's sister, my Helen Carroll, contacted to express her disappointment with my greed, and 2 of my cousins unfriended me on social media. Dad's brother, my Uncle Pete, sent me an email advising me to do the right thing before this gets ugly. The only person who showed kindness was Helen Patricia, my grandmother's sister. When she called, she stated, "This isn't what Grace would have wanted. She trusted you, which is why she left you in that mansion. Don't allow them to intimidate you." Ryan contacted me to grab coffee 3 days after I hired Natalie. As he stirred sugar into his latte, he appeared worn out and uneasy. He yelled out, "They intend to sell the house to developers. They have been negotiating for several months. Even prior to your announcement of the gallery concept, they want to demolish Grandma's house," I said, feeling violently sick. "The home our family has owned for many generations." Ryan gave a pitiful nod. "The value of the property exceeds that of the house. $2 million is what the developers are giving." "And when did they intend to inform me of this?" "Ryan, it's my house." He cast his gaze downward. "They believed that if they put enough pressure on you, you would finally give in. The developers are going to move on if they are unable to close by the end of the quarter." All of a sudden, it made clear the pressing need, the drastic actions, the slander campaign. Family values were not at issue here. It has to do with money, plain and simple. For me, too, the financial strain was growing. To make up for my prolonged stay, I was paying for a lawyer, replacing necessities that were still locked in the house, and buying groceries and utilities for Sophie. My savings were rapidly depleting. The work was getting hard. When I explained that I was coping with a family emergency, my manager was supportive, but my performance suffered. I struggled with creative tasks, missed deadlines, and became distracted during meetings. My Chicago-based client was already voicing reservations about our early ideas. Despite everything, Sophie was my rock, but I could sense the tension building. Her boyfriend was obviously irritated by my frequent visits, and her 1-bedroom apartment wasn't built for 2 people. When I brought it up, Sophie insisted, "You can stay as long as you need. Brian gets it." However, I could see that she was tired. Either way, I had to get the matter resolved. A week following our first meeting, Natalie contacted to provide an update. "Next Monday is the scheduled hearing for the emergency injunction," she stated. "The judge is conservative but fair. We will benefit because she will abide by the law. However, we must be incredibly well prepared. How about my parents? Have they answered? They have legal representation. Baxter, Douglas. Her voice changed. The news wasn't good. He is combative. Focuses on property issues within families. He will attempt to portray you as manipulative by alleging that you forced your grandmother. That is absurd. I never would. I understand. But be ready for the unpleasant part. These situations frequently do. I woke up that night and stared at the ceiling while lying on Sophie's couch. The individuals who brought me up, who taught me right from wrong, were suddenly prepared to tell lies in order to ruin my relationships and reputation. For financial gain. I could not understand the depth of the treachery. But something else had started to form beneath the pain. Anger. An intense, defensive rage that would give me the willpower to defend myself. My hair was pulled back in a tidy ponytail, and I wore a traditional navy blue dress and short heels on the morning of the hearing. Natalie had told me to be dignified and understanding. When we first met outside the courthouse, she stated, first impressions matter. Judges are also people. My phone rang with an unknown number while we were doing a final rundown of our plan. I would normally have disregarded it, but for some reason, I had to respond. Is Emily Carter here? A man's voice inquired. Indeed. Who's phoning? Boston Police Department Officer Daniels. To address certain inquiries regarding stolen property, we need you to come down to the station. My blood froze. Property stolen? What are you discussing? We have received a report that you took valuable items, including jewelry and documents, from your parents' home without their consent. I couldn't speak. Panicked, I glanced at Natalie. She picked up the phone right away. This is Natalie Chin, the lawyer for Miss Parker. What precisely is the charge against her? Only Natalie's end of the conversation was audible to me, but it was sufficient. My parents had reported me to the police, saying I had taken my grandmother's valuable papers and jewelry, the very things they had refused to give back. Natalie firmly stated, my client will not be coming to the station today. We have a hearing in court. In addition, the objects in question are legally hers, having been bequeathed to her by her grandmother. Following today's session, we will be pleased to answer these unfounded accusations. Her face was stern as she hung up. This is a typical strategy, she stated. They're attempting to scare you. Your credibility is damaged if they can portray you as a thief. I trembled as I murmured, they're lying to the police. My own parents are accusing me of being untrue. Natalie squeezed my arm and said softly, pay attention to the hearing. One conflict at a time. For the first time since they changed the locks, I saw my parents inside the courtroom. My mother clenched her jaw and stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact. My father's face reddened with rage as he gave me an open gaze. Ryan, who appeared unhappy, sat behind them. Clinical efficiency characterized the hearing's progress. Natalie produced the deed transfer, the will, and proof of the unlawful lockout. The lawyer for my parents, a stern-faced, icy-eyed man, maintained that I had left the property willingly and that my parents were only securing it. He asserted that Miss Parker declared intentions to drastically change the historic family home in defiance of her grandmother's stated desires. As the previous heir's apparent, her parents were acting to maintain the intended character of the property. The judge, an elderly woman with sharp, piercing eyes, didn't appear impressed. Mr. Baxter, the will is very clear, she stated coolly. The property is legally owned by Miss Parker. It is not a legal concern for this court to decide whether her refurbishment plans respect or desecrate her grandmother's memories. She went to my folks. Mr. and Mrs. Parker, if you wanted to challenge the will, you had legal options. Changing the locks and taking away the legitimate owner's belongings weren't among them. My father's expression darkened even more when my mother started to cry. The judge went on, speaking to their lawyer. The emergency injunction is being granted by me. Access to Miss Parker's property must be granted right away. Within 24 hours, all personal possessions must be returned. If anything is broken or missing, there will be more repercussions. It ought to have felt like a win. But I only experienced emptiness. This isn't over, my father hissed to my mother as we were leaving the courthouse. Not by any means. Natalie was outside talking about what to do next when a policeman came up to us. Emily Carter. With a knotted gut, I nodded. I have some questions for you regarding the stolen goods that Linda and Charles Parker reported. I had to face the embarrassment of being interrogated about larceny in front of the courthouse, despite Natalie's legal justifications. The incident was observed by a number of coworkers from nearby workplaces. I sensed their inquisitive looks. My supervisor summoned me into his office the following day as I was getting ready to take back my home. Is everything all right, Emily? I've heard some alarming rumors. My heart fell. What kinds of things? He appeared uneasy. Rumor has it that you're having legal issues of some sort. It has to do with thievery. Additionally, a client reported seeing a social media post regarding you converting a historic house into a business space, possibly in violation of preservation regulations. I was horrified to learn that my parents' campaign had permeated my career. The client I had recently registered in Chicago, the account I had been having trouble with since the lockout, was probably the one who had read the message. I tried to seem assured as I said, "It's a personal matter that's being resolved. There has been a family dispute regarding my grandmother's house, which she left to me. Everything is being done in a lawful manner." I could see the doubt in his eyes, even though he nodded. Make sure it doesn't interfere with your work, though. Losing the Westfield account would be disastrous. I eventually returned home that afternoon, accompanied by a police guard and a locksmith as Natalie's precaution. I was met with a heartbreaking scene. The house had been cleared of sentimental and costly items, but nothing was obviously destroyed. I had previously worked at my grandmother's old desk, but it was empty with its drawers taken out. Where family photos had been hanging, the walls were empty. The old copper pans that had usually hung in the kitchen were no longer there either. As she took pictures with her phone, Natalie urged me to document everything. This is a court contempt case. The policeman that was with us was uneasy. He advised, you might want to file a separate theft report. The irony was bitter. My parents had often looted the house themselves and accused me of stealing. The entire weight of what had transpired fell on me that night, when I was by myself in the almost deserted house. I hadn't only been deceived by my family, they had made a conscious effort to ruin me on all fronts, financially, professionally, legally, and personally. For financial gain, they were prepared to jeopardize our relationship, my reputation, and even my grandmother's wishes. They had taken the sheets, so I cuddled up on my bare mattress and sobbed till my throat hurt. Never before had I felt so isolated. The ones who were meant to love me the most completely abandoned me. I really thought about giving up at that very time. I might as well give them the house. Perhaps losing my family, my reputation, and my peace of mind was not worth the money. Perhaps, as they said, I was selfish. I grabbed my phone and dialed Natalie to let her know I wanted to make a settlement. I saw an email notification at that point. Your grandmother Grace. Important information is the subject line. I opened it out of curiosity, even though I was exhausted. I was your grandmother's nurse in her last months, Emily, but you don't know me. You should be aware of certain aspects of your parents' conduct before to her passing. If you want to talk, give me a call. It had a phone number and was signed Patricia Wilson. There was something about the timing that seemed too ideal, too fortunate. Was this just another ploy? A phony nurse, using fabricated evidence to further undermine my credibility? Just as I was going to remove it, my phone rang. The area code was from Western Massachusetts, where my grandmother's sister lived, but I didn't know the number. Hey, Emily? It's Patricia, you're Helen. I have been attempting to contact you. Helen Patricia? I was perplexed. Regarding being Grandma's nurse, did you just send me an email? A pause occurred. No, sweetheart. I'm not a nurse. However, I do have some information that could be useful to you. Your grandma didn't want your parents to find some of the items she left with me for safekeeping. Even though it was almost midnight, I felt hope for the first time in weeks at that very moment. I drove 2 hours to Western Massachusetts, where my great Helen Patricia lived, and called in sick again the following morning. It had been years since I last saw her. Long before I was even born, she and my mother had a falling out. She was a strict woman who gave nice birthday cards with crisp $20 bills. That's all I remember. She lived in a modest, tidy cottage with flower gardens all around. She greeted me at the door, tall and straight for someone in her 80s. After examining my features, she remarked, "You look like Grace." When something was important to her, she wore that same determined expression. Patricia described why she had reached out over tea and fine porcelain cups inside. Your grandma was aware that Charles and Linda would challenge the will. For years, ever since the neighborhood's property values began to rise, they had been putting pressure on her to sell the house. I was taken aback. She never told me about that. Patricia's face became stern. Grace was keeping you safe. Toward the end, your parents got very combative. Charles even proposed declaring her incompetent so they could handle her financial decisions. My hand trembled as I held the teacup. Did they attempt to pronounce Grandma incompetent? They even set up an assessment with a geriatric psychiatrist. Grace was incensed. Instead of dividing everything as she had initially intended, she then made the decision to leave everything to you. Patricia got up and moved to a desk that was on a roll top. Then she took a manila envelope out of a secret compartment. She handed these to me to keep secure. "Make sure Emily gets them if anything happens after I'm gone," he said. The envelope contained a number of documents, including copies of 2-year-old emails between my parents and real estate developers, a handwritten note from my grandmother outlining her reasons for leaving me the house, and, most damning of all, a little USB drive. Patricia used her PC to play it. My grandmother's steady, clear voice could be heard recording a conversation in which my parents threatened to place her in a nursing home if she refused to sell. She said, "I am in good physical and mental health. I'm recording this because I'm worried that my son-in-law and daughter-in-law would try to contest my will. I freely and fully comprehend my actions when I decide to leave my house to my granddaughter Emily." As I listened, tears fell down my cheeks. I was given a tissue by Patricia. She said softly, "She loved you very much. When she couldn't trust her own daughter, she trusted you to do the right thing by that house." I brought the items directly to Natalie back in Boston. She went over everything in detail, her face becoming more assured. She held up the USB and said, "This changes everything. Just the recording demonstrates that your grandmother was under pressure and in good mental health. The email's acts against you demonstrate premeditation. Now what do? We launch an offensive." She started typing quickly. "I'm adding claims for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress to my application for a more permanent injunction." The lawyer for my parents sent Natalie an email that afternoon. The topic line was straightforward. "We're having trouble." An urgent meeting to explore settlement options was sought in the email's body. "Recent events have changed the situation for our clients. We think that resolving this issue in private will benefit everyone." Natalie grinned glumly. "They are aware of what we have. They simply have no idea what it is." "Remain composed and concentrated," Natalie had suggested. "Emotion isn't important here. The goal is to safeguard your future." As we went over the terms, our lawyers said the most. Within 48 hours, my parents would return everything that was taken out of the house. Anyone they had been in touch with regarding me, including my place of employment, would receive written retractions. Unless I personally invited them, they would stay at least 100 yards away from the property and pay my legal fees plus $50,000 in damages. At one point, my father murmured, "These terms are excessive." A warning hand was placed on his arm by his lawyer. "We've talked about this, Charles." My mother's hand shook a little when it came time to sign. Her eyes searched mine for a hint of softening as she glanced up at me. She whispered, "This is still your family, Emily. Is all of this truly required?" I slowly looked into her eyes. "You falsely reported me to the police. You attempted to ruin my career. Grandma wanted me to have her belongings, but you took them away." "Yes, then. It is essential." Anger made my father's face flush. "You've been obstinate all along, similar to your grandmother. This family has been ripped apart by this house." "No," I said calmly. "This family was ripped apart by your actions. The house served just as a pretext." Ryan came over to me in the corridor after they signed. In contrast to our parents, he had appeared to be sincerely moved by the proof Helen Patricia had offered. His voice was thick with passion as he replied, "I should have stood up for you. I was a coward." Although I wasn't yet prepared to forgive him, I could see that his regret was genuine. "Indeed, you ought to have. But now that you're here, you're admitting it. That's something. Is there a time we can talk?" "Next week, perhaps, coffee." I gave a wary nod. "Perhaps. I will send you a text." I started by thoroughly cleaning my area in order to regain it. I opened all the windows, saged every room, and scrubbed away the residual energy of betrayal with the assistance of Sophie and 2 other friends. We purposefully made new, happy experiences in the area as we ordered pizza and enjoyed wine on the porch. Sophie raised her glass and toasted to Emily, who not only regained her house, but also her power. Our lawyers oversaw the return of my grandmother's possessions. 2 moving firms showed up with unpacked boxes and furniture. I noted what was still lacking after comparing each item to the inventory we had made. I said, "The jewelry box isn't here. Her journal isn't about the house either." With my lawyer's approval, my mother, who had arrived in contravention of the agreement, spoke up. "Our safe deposit box contains the jewelry box. The diary." She paused. "I might have tossed it out." In rage, "I apologize." The journal's disappearance was like losing a piece of my grandmother again. I averted my gaze to conceal my unexpected tears. "You'll return it right away if it appears," Natalie stated firmly. I sat by myself in my grandmother's parlor, which I still intended to develop into a gallery, surrounded by boxes of returned items after my parents and the movers had left. It ought to have felt like a win. Instead, I experienced an odd sense of emptiness. Legally and physically, I had the house back. However, the family I had known was no longer there. Our connection would never be the same, even if we were to eventually reestablish it in some way. They had revealed their true selves to me, and I could never forget it. I started the gradual process of restructuring my life. I had to fix the professional damage first. After I explained the circumstances and showed my supervisor the official retraction my parents had signed admitting their false claims, he became accepting. He said with empathy, "Family business can get ugly. Take as much time as necessary to settle in. However, you must quickly return to your full potential." The Westfield account remains unstable. Determined to prove my worth, I pushed myself back into my work with fresh vigor. The Westfield campaign resumed its course in a matter of weeks, and I even managed to negotiate a minor extension with them. There was a mixed response from the community. After learning about what had transpired, a few neighbors who had known my grandmother offered their support. Others, my parents' friends, stayed calm and aloof. I made the decision to stop wasting time attempting to please everyone. Legally recognized and documented, the truth was on my side. In order to make sure the conversion preserved the house's character, I hired an architect with experience in historic renovations and moved forward with my designs for the art gallery. It was a healing process, a means of expressing my own vision and keeping my word to my grandmother. I started a careful reconciliation with Ryan at our weekly coffee dates. He appeared sincere in his regret and anxious to mend our connection, unlike our parents. "They're not managing this well," he acknowledged in one exchange. "Dad is consuming more alcohol. Mom hardly ever leaves the house. They are embarrassed." I made the point. I didn't humiliate them. That was their own doing. "I understand. I'm not standing up for them." I simply felt you ought to be aware. Even though I wasn't prepared to make amends with our parents, I valued his candor. The injuries were too recent. The betrayal is too deep. The most difficult holiday season was the first one. Every Thanksgiving, my father would carve the turkey and my mother would prepare a lavish feast at my grandmother's house, which is now my home. Instead, I had a Friendsgiving this year, and everyone who had helped me get through the crisis crowded the dining room. As we cleaned up after ourselves, Sophie said, "It's different. However, in some respects, it might be better. No stress. Avoid treading carefully around your mother's sentiments." She was correct. Without the undercurrents of rivalry and criticism that had characterized previous events, the celebration had been laid back and happy. After everyone had gone that evening, I took a seat in my grandmother's favorite chair by the fireplace and gave myself permission to fully experience the conflicting emotions of release and loss that had been churning inside of me. My family as I knew it was gone. Perhaps more importantly, though, I had learned that I could stick to my convictions even when everyone else disagreed with me. When the gallery first opened in the spring, it displayed artwork by regional artists with a focus on memory, home, and change. A very large number of people showed up on opening night, including some initially doubtful neighbors. One elderly neighbor pointed to the well-designed area and said, "Your grandmother would have loved this. This house always needed young energy," she added. My brother also arrived with a tiny welcoming present, an old photo of our grandmother standing on the porch with a big smile on her face. "I discovered it at Mom and Dad's in an old album," he said. "Thought it should have been here." I had a strong sense of my grandmother's presence as people mixed and marveled at the artwork, as though she were walking around the rooms with me, approving of the way I had paid tribute to her history while claiming the space as my own. I felt completely at home for the first time since the locks had been changed all those months ago. I stood in what was now a bustling gallery space, presenting an exhibition of photography centered on family dynamics across generations, a year after the court hearing that gave me back my house. Both I and the friends who had been there for me during the struggle understood the symbolism. As we looked around the packed room, Sophie remarked, "Full circle moment." It had been a year of significant change. The house itself has changed from being a battlefield to a place of refuge. With careful attention to detail, I had finished the renovations, maintaining historical characteristics while designing a room that mirrored my personal aesthetic preferences. Operating 3 days a week, the gallery generated enough revenue to cover upkeep expenses without causing any disturbances to the surrounding community. My career had not only bounced back, but thrived. I gained confidence at work as a result of the resolve I found during the conflict. I had been given the opportunity to lead a team and pursue significant projects after being promoted to creative director. Ryan and I had slowly reestablished our connection, based on honesty rather than required familial ties. As he sought to acknowledge his part in what had transpired and make atonement, our weekly coffee dates had become into sincere friendships. During one of our more in-depth discussions, he said, "I was scared of standing up to them. I've always been worried about their opinion of me. I learned a lot about courage from seeing you fight back." A few blocks away from me, he had lately moved into an apartment, a tangible representation of his decision to side with his sister instead of our parents. Even my parents were still a complex wound. We just communicated sometimes via text messages and met briefly in a neutral setting on my birthday. There was no pretense in the connection, it was formal. The unconditional affection they had shown themselves incapable of giving me was no longer what I expected. And that clarity was freedom in and of itself. During one of our sessions, my therapist had informed me that they would never be the parents I deserved. Your healing process includes accepting it. In other areas, I had discovered unexpected family. Helen Patricia had established herself as a consistent figure in my life, coming to visit once a month and telling me things about my grandmother that I had never heard before. Compared to blood family, Sophie and my other close pals had shown themselves to be more faithful. My chosen family now included several of the artists who had exhibited in the gallery. However, Internal change was the most significant. "We changed all the locks," said the one who had received that heartbreaking text message. The statement, "You don't have a home anymore," made me feel like a new person. Someone who still held the views that parents would always choose their children's welfare before their own, and that family devotion was unwavering. The gullible woman had vanished. Someone stronger, more perceptive, and ultimately more tranquil had taken her place. I had come to understand the difference between self-erasure and healthy compromise, between forgiveness and folly, and between true love and conditional approbation. As the show was coming to an end, I spotted a familiar face hovering close to the entrance. Ryan was here, along with our mom. My heart began to race. This was not what I was expecting. Since the settlement, she had not visited the residence. Ryan looked at me apologetically, as if this had not been anticipated. I walked warily toward them. My mother appeared older and more frail than I had recalled. Her knuckles were white as she gripped her handbag. "The gallery is stunning," she said softly. "Your grandma would have been pleased." There was no apology. She wasn't even given credit for her actions. However, it was something, a tiny acknowledgement that my idea for the house was correct. I said, keeping the courteous distance that now defined our interactions, "Thank you for coming." She nodded as she gently scanned the room, taking in the pictures of families, some of them happy, others blatantly showing distance and strife. "How is your dad doing?" I inquired, more as a courtesy than out of any worry. "Controlling his blood pressure. The physician advises him to lessen his tension." Her tone included a trace of the old accusation, as though I was somehow to blame for my father's health issues. A few things remained the same. However, my response to them had. I didn't take the criticism personally. Instead, I just nodded and let the remark go without feeling guilty or defensive. Following their departure, Ryan texted, "I apologize for it." When she found out where I was heading, she demanded to come. "You handled it gracefully." The experience made me realize how far I had come. That short, intense encounter would have left me inconsolable for days a year ago. It was only a minute now, neither defining nor shattering my tranquility. Later that night, I was in my grandmother's study, the one room I had preserved nearly precisely as it had been throughout her lifetime, after shutting down the gallery and making my way through the peaceful rooms of my house. She had a framed phrase that she had always admired on her desk. Maya Angelou's words. "Events may not always be within your control, but you have the power to refuse to let them limit you." My grandma had given me that as her parting present. Not only the house itself, but the chance to defend it and learn about my own power. My parents had unintentionally driven me to discover an unbreakable home within myself by attempting to steal my home. Know this if you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to be protecting you. The people who didn't value you don't define your value. Family is something we both create and are born into. And occasionally, our chosen family ends up being our strongest ally. Have you ever had to defend something that was legitimately yours against family members? How did you respond to it? Leave a comment below with your tale. Please hit the like button and subscribe if this tale made you feel less alone in your own family's challenges. Our most painful experiences might occasionally serve as our best teachings. However, we are not alone on that journey. And in the end, Emily's story reminds us that the best revenge isn't anger, it's rising above. Living well. Healing deeply. Choosing peace over chaos. If you're dealing with betrayal, set your boundaries, focus on your growth, and remember, you don't need to fight to win. Sometimes, walking away with your dignity is the win. Have you ever been hurt by the people who were supposed to protect you? How did you rise from it? Share your story in the comments. You never know who needs to hear it, and who you might help by telling it.